Story number 2. Room 713. The Grand Avenue Hotel in New Orleans stood as a testament to old-world charm. Its elegant facade, adorned with wrought iron balconies and ornate carvings, told stories of jazz-age splendor and whispered scandals. But beneath the layers of grandeur, there was a shadow, a darkness that clung to one particular room, 713. The staff never assigned it to guests. The door remained bolted, and the key was tucked away in the manager's drawer, gathering dust. Those who worked at the hotel knew better than to disturb it, but rumors had a way of escaping, spilling into the streets and attracting the curious. That's how Suraj Patel, a documentary filmmaker from India, found himself standing in the dimly lit lobby, demanding the key. "I'm paying for a room," Suraj insisted, his accent thick but his resolve thicker. "I want that one." The receptionist, a wiry man with tired eyes, hesitated. "Room 713 is out of service, sir. Maintenance issues." "Come on," Suraj said, flashing a charming smile. "I've stayed in worse places. I'm here to explore the city's mysteries, and this one is calling my name." After a long pause and an uneasy glance at the manager, the key was reluctantly handed over. The first night, room 713 was eerily pristine, as if it had been frozen in time. A four-poster bed with heavy drapes dominated the space. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, seemed to ripple in the dim light. Suraj dropped his bag on the armchair and set up his camera. "This is perfect," he muttered, speaking to the lens. "The infamous room 713. Let's see if the legends hold any truth." The first hour passed uneventfully. Suraj filmed himself describing the room's history. How a woman named Lillian Delacroix had been found dead here in 1927. Her body was discovered sprawled across the bed, her face twisted in terror, with no clear cause of death. Guests who stayed afterward reported nightmares, disembodied whispers, and, eventually, physical harm. "It's all just stories," Suraj said, leaning back on the bed. But as midnight approached, the temperature in the room plummeted. Suraj wrapped himself in a blanket, dismissing the chill as poor insulation. Then he heard it, a faint knock. At first, he thought it came from the door. But when he opened it, the hallway was empty. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing from the wall behind the bed. Suraj pressed his ear against the cold plaster. There it was, a rhythmic tapping, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was trapped inside. A shadow in the frame. The next morning, Suraj reviewed the footage he'd captured. Most of it was mundane. Him narrating, adjusting the camera, pacing. But in one clip, as he moved past the mirror, a shadow followed him. It wasn't his. He paused the video, rewinding and playing it back frame by frame. The shadow was tall, with elongated limbs and an indistinct face. "Could be a trick of the light," Suraj mumbled, though his voice wavered. Determined to uncover the truth, he spent the day interviewing locals about room 713. They told him about Lillian's mysterious death and the strange occurrences afterward, lights flickering, furniture moving on its own, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. One old woman, her eyes clouded with age, leaned in close. "The room isn't haunted by Lillian," she whispered. "It's haunted by what killed her." The second night, Suraj returned to the room at dusk, the weight of the old woman's words pressing on him. He set up his camera once again, this time aiming it at the bed. "I'm staying another night," he said to the lens. "Let's see if anything happens." The knocking began earlier this time, around 10 p.m. It was joined by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Suraj's breath fogged in the icy air as he scanned the room. And then, the bed creaked. He turned sharply, his flashlight illuminating the bedspread, which now sagged in the center, as if someone invisible was sitting there. "Hello?" Suraj's voice cracked. "Who's there?" The bed groaned again, and this time, an imprint appeared. Two hand-shaped depressions pressing into the mattress. The hum grew louder, evolving into a chorus of whispers. The words were indistinct but insistent, like a warning or a threat. The final hours. Suraj tried to leave. He grabbed the doorknob and twisted, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned into screams, filling the room with deafening chaos. The mirror shattered, shards flying like daggers, yet none struck him. The walls seemed to ripple. the floral wallpaper peeling back to reveal charred beneath. A figure emerged from the corner, where shadows had gathered thick as smoke. It was Lillian, or what was left of her. Her eyes were empty sockets, her jaw unhinged in a silent scream. She reached for Siraj, her fingers claw-like and trembling. "You shouldn't have come," she rasped, her voice layered with dozens of others. The room began to collapse around him. The walls twisted, the floor buckled, and Siraj felt himself being pulled toward the bed as if an invisible force was dragging him. The aftermath. When the hotel staff unlocked room 713 the next morning, it was empty. Siraj's belongings were gone, as if he'd never been there. But the camera remained, perched on the tripod. The last recording showed Siraj staring into the lens, his eyes wide with terror, as a shadow enveloped him. The screen went black, but the audio continued, a single, blood-curdling scream. The Grand Avenue Hotel quietly sealed off room 713 for good. But late at night, when the hallways are silent, the staff swear they can still hear the faint sound of knocking. Story number 3. The Shadow Wing. In upstate New York, nestled among sprawling oaks and mist-laden grounds, stood Shadow High School, a relic of America's academic past. Built in the mid-1800s, its Gothic architecture had once symbolized prestige and knowledge. Now, whispers of something far darker clung to its crumbling west wing. No one went near that part of the school. The wing had been sealed off decades ago after an unexplained accident, and even the staff spoke of it in hushed tones. Yet, to outsiders, it was just another ghost story. The new girl, Emily Carter, freshly transferred from Chicago, wasn't one to believe in haunted tales. A curious and determined 16-year-old, she had an insatiable thirst for mysteries. When she overheard students talking about the West Wing during lunch, her interest was piqued. "They say you can hear voices there at night," one boy whispered, his eyes wide. "Total nonsense," scoffed another. "It's just rats and old pipes." Emily smirked. "Guess I'll have to find out for myself." Her new friends, Claire, Nathan, and Jake, tried to dissuade her. But Emily's mind was made up. The forbidden door. That Friday, as the final bell echoed through the school, Emily and her reluctant companions lingered behind. They waited until the janitor's cart rattled down the hallway, then made their way to the West Wing's entrance. The door was massive, its wood warped with age, and a rusted chain looped through the handles. A faded sign read, "Do not enter, for your safety." "That's welcoming," Nathan muttered, already regretting his decision. Emily pulled a bolt cutter from her bag. Time to break some rules. The chain snapped with a loud clang, and the door creaked open, releasing a gust of cold, stale air. Inside the shadows, the air inside was suffocating, heavy with decay. Their footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, stirring up motes of dust that danced in the faint beams of their flashlights. Rows of lockers lined the cracked walls, many hanging open with contents spilling out. Yellowed papers, broken pencils, a lone, tattered shoe. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Claire whispered. Emily stopped in front of a classroom door. Something was scrawled across it in faded red paint. "Turn back while you still can." "Looks like someone had a flair for the dramatic," she said, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was eerily pristine. Desks were neatly arranged, and a chalkboard bore a single word. "Run." "That's creepy," Jake said, stepping back. "Someone probably staged it," Emily replied, though her voice wavered. The whispers began. As they explored deeper into the wing, the temperature plummeted. The once faint sound of whispers grew louder, weaving through the air like an unseen thread. "Do you hear that?" Claire asked, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "It's just the wind," Emily said, though she didn't believe it. The whispers morphed into something intelligible. Words. Faint, overlapping voices. "Leave. They're watching." Too late now. The group froze. The sound wasn't coming from the halls. It was emanating from the walls themselves. Nathan backed toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. "What the hell?" Emily approached the chalkboard, her flashlight revealing faint scratches beneath the dust. She traced the lines with her fingers and realized they formed handprints. Small, childlike handprints. The shadow revealed. Suddenly, the lights on their flashlights flickered. A low, Guttural growl resonated from somewhere deep within the wing. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. From the corner of the room, shadows began to coalesce. It wasn't just darkness. It had substance, a writhing, twisting form that defied logic. Two glowing red eyes appeared within the mass, locking onto the group. "Run!" Emily screamed, but the door wouldn't budge. The shadow surged forward, its form splitting into tendrils that snaked across the room. One wrapped around Jake's ankle, yanking him to the floor. He screamed as he was dragged toward the black mass. "Help me!" he cried, but the others were paralyzed with fear. Emily grabbed a chair and swung it at the tendril, breaking its grip. Jake scrambled to his feet, but the shadow wasn't retreating. The final stand. Nathan and Claire pushed against the door with all their might, and it finally gave way. The group tumbled into the hallway, slamming the door behind them. "Is it gone?" Claire asked, her voice shaking. Emily turned to look, but the door had disappeared. In its place was a solid, unbroken wall. No, that's not possible," she stammered. A faint whisper brushed past her ear. "We'll see you soon." The aftermath. The next morning, the school was abuzz with rumors. Emily, Nathan, Claire, and Jake never spoke of what happened in the West Wing, but they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Weeks later, Emily found a note in her locker. It was written in red ink, the handwriting jagged and hurried. "The shadows don't forget." She transferred schools soon after, but nightmares of the red-eyed shadow plagued her for years. And sometimes, late at night, she swore she could still hear the whispers. Story number 4. The Whispering Graveyard. In the cold embrace of a London autumn, Greenmore Cemetery stood like a sentinel against the skyline. The centuries-old graveyard, with its wrought iron gates and moss-covered headstones, was a haunting beauty by day and a sinister enigma by night. Legends swirled around its oldest section, the Forgotten Quarter, where the graves of the unmarked and unnamed resided. People whispered of shadows that moved without light, voices that called out from nowhere, and a presence, ancient, watchful, that dwelled in its heart. Few dared to venture there after sunset. The daring quartet, Mark, Olivia, James, and Emma, were thrill-seekers, bonded by a shared love of urban legends and mysteries. On a crisp Friday evening, as they gathered at a nearby cafe, talk turned to Greenmore. "Have you heard about the grave with no name?" James asked, stirring his coffee. "They say it's cursed. Anyone who lingers there hears whispers, and some never come back." "Sounds like rubbish," Mark said with a dismissive laugh. "Let's find out," Olivia challenged, her green eyes gleaming with mischief. Emma hesitated, the most cautious of the group. "Guys, that place has a reputation for a reason." But peer pressure and curiosity were a potent mix, and soon they found themselves standing before the cemetery gates. Entering the shadows, the air grew colder as they stepped inside, the distant hum of the city muffled by the thick canopy of ancient trees. Their flashlights carved narrow beams through the darkness, revealing weathered gravestones and cryptic epitaphs. The group followed the overgrown path leading to the Forgotten Quarter. The headstones here were older, some leaning precariously, others swallowed by vines. In the center of the clearing stood the nameless grave, a slab of stone cracked down the middle, its surface bare save for one cryptic phrase. "Disturb not the sleeper." "Creepy," Olivia muttered, running her fingers over the weathered inscription. "Let's get a closer look," Mark said, already stepping forward. The first sign. As they gathered around the grave, the air turned dense, heavy with an unnatural stillness. Emma shivered. "Do you feel that? It's like we're being watched." James laughed nervously. "Your imagination is running wild." But then they heard it, a faint, disjointed whisper, like words spoken through static. "What was that?" Olivia's voice quavered. "Probably the wind," Mark said, though his bravado was faltering. The whispers grew louder, morphing into distinct words. "Leave, you don't belong here. They are coming." The flashlight in James's hand flickered, casting erratic shadows. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Emma said, gripping Olivia's arm. The shadow emerges. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a chilling wind rushed past them, carrying the scent of decay. From the darkness, a shadow began to take form, not the kind cast by light, but a living, pulsating entity. It slithered across the ground like smoke, coalescing into a humanoid shape. 2 pinpricks of crimson light appeared where its eyes should have been. Mark stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" The shadow spoke, its voice a blend of many, male, female, childlike, and ancient. "You disturbed my rest." The words weren't loud, but they reverberated through their skulls, each syllable laced with malice. A desperate escape. "Run!" James shouted, but the shadow moved faster than any of them could react. Tendrils of darkness shot out, wrapping around Olivia's wrist and pulling her toward the grave. "Help me!" she screamed, her nails scraping the dirt as she tried to resist. Mark and James grabbed her arms, pulling with all their strength. Emma frantically recited a prayer she barely remembered, tears streaming down her face. The tendrils hesitated, as though recoiling from the words, and Olivia broke free. The group bolted back toward the entrance, but the shadow pursued them, its guttural growl echoing through the cemetery. The gate's curse. When they reached the gate, they found it locked. It had been wide open when they entered, but now it was sealed tight, the iron bars cold and unyielding. Emma turned to face the shadow, her voice trembling but resolute. "Stay back." The shadow loomed closer, its tendrils stretching out like fingers. Mark fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a lighter. He held it up, the small flame flickering in the dark. To their surprise, the shadow hissed, retreating slightly. "Fire," James said, catching on. "It's afraid of fire." Mark grabbed a fallen branch, setting it alight. The makeshift torch blazed, casting long shadows that seemed to ripple across the cemetery. The final stand. The group swung the torch wildly, forcing the shadow back toward the forgotten quarter. It shrieked, a sound that pierced their ears and shook their bones. As they approached the nameless grave, the shadow faltered, its form losing cohesion. Mark thrust the torch forward, and with a final, guttural roar, the shadow dissolved into the ground, leaving only silence in its wake. The gate creaked open behind them, and they didn't wait to question it. They ran until they were back on the main road, the cemetery's dark silhouette fading into the distance. The aftermath. 4 days. None of them spoke about what had happened. But at night, Emma often woke to faint whispers in her room, as though the cemetery hadn't truly let them go. Months later, Olivia found an old journal in the local library. It described a gravekeeper who had been buried alive in Greenmore for betraying his town. His last words were carved into his tombstone. "Disturb not the sleeper." The quartet never returned to the cemetery, but they knew the shadow's warning all too well. Some places are meant to be left undisturbed.